Welcome to the Young Indy Chroniclers, a podcast about the making of the show The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which first aired on ABC in 1992.
Kept thinking about what was Indiana Jones like as a young man. I came up with this idea of him seeing the world through the eyes of a soldier and a secret agent.
Over the course of our podcast, we're going to talk to a whole host of very talented people who either worked on this show or were there from the beginning.
We were able to shoot it on location in the real places where these events took place.
Oh, make it up as you go. Oh boy, that's great advice.
We hired some of the best European directors, a whole host of very, very talented people.
I'm your host, Peter Holmstrom.
And I'm Daniel Noah, and this is the Young Indy Chroniclers.
There's only one rule, Indiana. Stay alive.
Welcome back to the Young Indy Chroniclers. This is the one and only podcast devoted specifically to the Young Indiana Jones television series and franchise. I'm your host, Peter Holmstrom, and joining me on this adventure of a lifetime is Mr. Daniel Noah.
Peter, it's so great to be here today.
This is part 2 of our conversation with the Academy Award-winning sound editor, also director, screenwriter, and just about everything else in the industry, Ben Burtt.
I can tell you, Peter, this whole process of talking to Ben and getting in touch with Ben and just arranging this time that we had with Ben, it's such a surreal thing. And I'm so excited that we've been able to bring this to the audience. So, well, you know what? Without any further ado, let's get back. Ben was telling us last time about his director's cut of Attack of the Hawkmen, and he was giving us some details about deleted scenes that we had never heard of. So let's get back to that right now.
There was a whole sequence where Indy and Nungesser crash, and there's a whole episode in Belgium with their plane being repaired by nuns and getting chased by spies into a church, and this Irish girl helps them, and there's a whole episode that's not part of it.
Wow. And you shot this?
Yeah, it was all shot and cut.
It's amazing.
It scored and everything. It was there were numerous things like that. There were other little extended parts of the story.
You are late. This is not the kind of operation you could be late for. It's vital you take off at sunset.
Take off? What do you mean, fly? I wasn't supposed to have to fly again.
How do you think you will get into Germany?
Well, by train.
No, we fly you in.
Originally, when Indy and Nungesser, he's going to take Indy into Germany and drop him off by parachute. On the way, they get shot. They meet up with a Zeppelin, and there's a battle with a Zeppelin at night.
Oh my God!
And that was filmed. We have that scene.
Wow!
And then they crash, and their plane is not destroyed, but it's broken up. And they're in this field in Belgium, I guess. And they eventually get help from the local spy network, and a group of clerics and nuns stage sort of a religious parade with all this fabric and flags and curtains and things, but it's actually to repair the airplane, so they march out, they repair the airplane, and Indy gets off on his trip, and then he's dropped into Germany. So it was another episode that's not in the that was completed, and I put it back in one of the scenes, but it really did slow things down. And there was also more scenes at the beginning of the episode setting up the idea that Indy and Remy were very unhappy being part of the Belgian spy service. And there's a whole sequence where they get ridiculed by the French working for the Belgians. And they're in a nightclub in Paris, and they get humiliated. And there's sort of almost a brawl takes place. And that motivates Indy to find a way to get out of the Belgian spy service. So I put back, 20 minutes or so of scenes, and that's what's in my restored version. And then I remixed it in 5.1, and then I up-resed it to high def, which took about a month of rendering in the computer.
Wow.
And that's what I have for my home version.
Wow.
Okay. So,
Wait, hang on. The 5.1, because we asked someone else about this.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm gonna split this up, because my other question is, I know when you guys did the VHS and then the DVD versions in the 90s, there were changes made, and we've sort of started cataloging ones that we've seen. The battle scene we talked about in Oganga is like 3 minutes longer on the DVD than it was broadcast as.
That's because of the great second unit.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's great. But did you not want to do that with Attack of the Hawkmen? You know, when you had an opportunity to do the home video version, obviously you could have put scenes back in if you wanted to. There was no runtime restriction. But was that ever discussed? Well,
Rick teased me endlessly about, well, what version of Hawkmen do you want? The 5-hour version, the 6-hour? You know, he kept saying that to me so often when we'd meet up that I felt guilty asking him to put anything back in the show. He would say something like, well, you're doing your 3-hour version, right? You know, he just assumed I was doing it behind the scenes, which I ended up doing anyways. But I didn't feel to push it. You know, you have to be sensible at some point. Sure. And say what's good for the show. You know, you direct a show and you have a hand in writing it. You look back and you can see weaknesses of, you know, your wish list. What if I had just done this or that? It'd be better. But I think most filmmakers probably feel that way. And there were some things I just never. I got onto other things. I moved on. You know.
Sure.
I felt like, well, it isn't worth. You know, it doesn't make the show twice as good. Yeah. It doesn't. It's just more dogfighting, more planes going down in flames, and you know, bigger explosions, and there's more of the land battle in the trenches because we had lots of leftover footage from all of our trench warfare. So on Indy's flying over the no man's land, there's cutting down below to men charging and you know hitting the barbed wire and kind of hits that the horrors of World War I action note again, that kind of stuff. So it was a little hard to argue to keep adding, you know, expense and trouble.
Yeah,
because they were doing their best to add story where it mattered, you know, to connect the episodes together to make the features.
I can't believe you actually did that. You could have ended up in front of a firing squad.
They'll never figure it out.
But still, you lost your career job and you put yourself back in the mud. You're crazy.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
I was going to ask, how involved were you in that re-editing process to make these features overall?
I wasn't. By that time, I had moved on to other things. A skeleton crew stayed on. The assistant editors who had been the assistants on Indy went on and pretty much spent whatever that time was to finish those episodes. Dana Mulligan, Cheryl Nardi, and there must have been some others. They did the legwork trying to finish those episodes for Rick and George. I think at that point I was still off directing some other IMAX films, and I wasn't available. I had moved ahead. One does have to decide, you know.
Yeah.
I can't. It was only later, like as I say, 10 years ago, that I said, well, now I have time. I got a gap in my schedule. I'm going to see what I can do to fix it.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. You mentioned the 5.1 sound on Hawkmen.
Yeah.
Are you working from the original project files? What's your...
Yeah, with Hawkmen, amazingly enough, and boy, the stuff is hard to find now. 10 years ago, that material was still in the warehouse, the original sound elements, and I was able to get a copy, you know, before, you know, subsequently see everything's been taken away, filed away by Disney, you know, because they own it now. So all the IP, all that negative, all the sound, everything, the tapes, all that kind of stuff are just not accessible anymore. I mean, you'd have to have a real reason to have someone allow you to go investigate. It'd have to be a good reason, not just whims of a director who thought he could make his show better. But the original shows, they were mixed in stereo, just two-channel stereo. I would have assumed they were an LTRT, which is a Dolby stereo, which means there's an encoded surround channel. I'm not sure.
That's what we were told by Laird Malaman when we had him on the show, that it was put into an LTRT container.
I would think that would have been standard practice for us then. See, when that show was done, a 5:1 didn't really exist as a format. I mean, it wasn't like the standard item. I mean, home video, nobody's going to have a way of playing a 6-channel, soundtrack. And the shows weren't assembled that way. I'm pretty sure they were, at best, some of them would have been done as I say, an LT-RT. It's just a way of having 4-channel stereo encoded into a track which is just 2 channels, so they can physically go on the media that it's connected with. But with a decoder at home, you play it back through your home amplifier receiver if you had one. You could decode it into a 4-channel presentation. I'm pretty sure we would have done it that way.
When you did your 5:1 mix, what are you working from?
Well, I went back and got the master mix of the show. I believe I had a dialogue only stem, so I could take the dialogue and move it into the center channel, or pan it around if it needed to. Most of the time it's in the center. And there were stereo music tracks, so I could put those left and right as they were, but I could use a 5:1 synthesis program to spread it around the back channels, because the music was not recorded in 5:1. It was the music masters on all the series were just 2-channel. And to go back and find the original music tapes from the studio sessions would be, I think, impossible at this point. Once again, it's like the negative. It would be so expensive, and who could justify it? And then I cut a lot of new sound effects where I could do things for the subwoofer, special sub-bass channel. And in the new scenes, I did not have Joel McNeely music for all of them, so I would steal music from other episodes, and get that in there, so it matched up, either something from Larry or Joel. And gosh, what else did I do? I sweetened a lot of sound effects because I could spread it around the room more, and there was more room for things to happen. So it was just enhancements. It's called sweetening.
I feel like anything you add should be considered original because it's your work. Well, so there's no real.
Okay, well, it's just my own taste. Yes, of course, it's brilliant. No, it's just made for a more fun presentation because I could show it in the main theater at Skywalker Ranch, and it looks and sounds pretty good. Yeah. Wow. And that's where it exists today.
Wow.
In fact, what I did, just because I love the way movies used to start, I put at the very beginning, digitally, a closed curtain, like you were in an old movie.
Yeah.
And then when the Paramount logo starts, it's projected on the wrinkles in the curtain. And then the curtain opens on the title, Paramount presents Hawkmen, done in the old roadshow kind of.
That's awesome.
Thing, and then the show starts as it normally did. So I gave it a little touch that was just the way I saw movies as a kid in the theater, where it's kind of a theatrical presentation. Hawkman also, it had a scene at the end, which is not in the show because it was out of, I tried to lobby this idea back when I was cutting the show with George, but he didn't go for it because it violated the format of the show. But it's in my my private home version, I guess. It's an epilogue. And so after the episode ends, you come up like sort of like American Graffiti, a title, a picture of every character, historic and otherwise in the show, a little cameo picture, and then some text that says what happened to them. Hobie Baker went on to killed 1 month later in a certain battle, but now there's a hockey award given to him every year. And Anthony Fokker went on to design airplanes, for years, and so on. And what happened to Lothar Richthofen, and what happened to Goering, Hermann Goering, and that ending worked nicely for me because it tied up the history. And you also saw that some of the characters, like Hermann Goering, went on to become Nazis and other, had other historical impact. And that was part of the goal of the series, was to place it in the context of history. And so it had that kind of ending to it, with some music and that sort of thing.
I love that. I mean, I think, like, in a way, it might have actually benefited the whole series a bit more, because there are times where, like, minor historical characters are in an episode. But if you don't kind of know that, like, sometimes, I can imagine being a kid and just, like, missing some of the stuff. So, like, really, like, hitting home that, like, oh, these are real people. I think maybe George was hoping that, like, the documentaries associated with the DVD or the stuff he was going to do ancillary to the series might have filled in those gaps. But I love that idea that you had this little American Graffiti.
Well,
cool.
we knew right from these. Well, I sensed right from the first season when I was working on the shows that the audience, the general audience, did not know enough about history to get to understand the importance of what they were seeing, the significance of it. And right away, I probably suggested it, or others, we talked about it anyways. Well, can't we have some kind of historical introduction, like, Alistair, what's his name? Alistair Clark, or like PBS at the beginning,
right,
walking up and telling us what's going to happen tonight. What's the context? Who's Charles de Gaulle or who's Picasso or something like that, because audiences didn't respond well to that. I think one of the reasons the series didn't do well in the ratings was because you needed the background. People like George Lucas, myself, were raised in a certain area where we learned those things in school because there was less history to know then. And so 20th century history, especially, the first 50 years of the 20th century, there's a lot going on in the world. We had 2 world wars and the atomic bomb and everything happened. So we were much more up on the figures involved, cultural figures. And so there was talk right away about, in say, the early broadcast days of the series, shouldn't we have some kind of opening where, maybe not instead of George Hall, it's some kind of a documentary that tells us where we are, like PBS would do or something like that. And so that was always that discussion went on. We realized the audiences we needed that help. Because when I would explain to people before they saw an episode or afterwards, I would say, well, yeah, this person was real, the one that Indy's dealing with, and he went on to do this or she, this or that. Oh, really? Well, I didn't know that kind of idea. So that idea needed to be reinforced. So fortunately, they did eventually make these documentaries, which are so useful in making the show, putting it in the right context.
For Richthofen, as with any fighter pilot in the German Air Service, the First World War, there was no real end of a tour of duty. You flew until you were shot down or until the war ended. We see, over time, an interesting change and transformation in him, in that he becomes irascible, he becomes edgy.
Speaking of the show's ratings, it was partly that idea that audiences didn't know history well enough to appreciate it. But secondly, it was an anthology series with a different setting and mostly a different set of characters each week.
Mother knows all about that.
Vicky said that you were a suffragette.
Yes.
And that they put you in prison and treated you pretty badly.
They treated her horribly, much worse than the ordinary prisoners.
But the ordinary prisoners weren't on hunger strikes.
They weren't force-fed either.
You're going to the Tory Palace, aren't you? I'm speaking there. I'm telling them what it's like in the trenches.
Yeah, someone's got to tell them. We've got to stop this war.
And that was that violated kind of the unwritten rules of television, which have always really been having shows that dealt with a familiar group of characters in the same setting every week. You love coming back to the living room in, the Dick Van Dyke Show or some new or Friends or something, because you now know the characters.
Yeah.
You know the setting. You're comfortable. It's comfortable television. You feel secure. You're opening your attention to something familiar. Whereas Young Indy, you had to suddenly figure out, well, where am I? Is this Europe or is this what time period? And so people couldn't connect very well.
You speak with an accent, Lieutenant.
I do?
Yes. I can't make it out. There was a rumor circulating that the commandant was releasing spies into the prison. Germans impersonating French and English officers. I wonder what we do if we exposed one of them.
We would kill him.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before, and I stand by it. It's just the show is really like the most anthology kind of show I've ever seen. Like it's more so than The Twilight Zone, more so than Tales from the Dark Side or whatever. It's just like every episode is something entirely different. You know, you have Transylvania on the one side, which is just like a Hammer horror movie.
You're insane. Am I?
Then you have the Kafka episode, which is just a farcical comedy on the other side.
They said you want Form 27A?
Yes, that's what they told me. I went to 4 different desks in 4 offices, and everyone said someone else had it.
Well, nobody has it. Form 27A has been superseded by Form 27B.
You just never knew what you were going to get. And that's, I think, partly why Daniel and I find it immensely rewatchable. But for audiences, ABC audiences in 1992, 1993, it was just like, what do we make of this show?
It wasn't part of the normal viewing habit, and it was off the normal menu, you might say, and people didn't have a taste for it, hadn't developed a taste for it. So that was a main problem with it. It's just, the way things went. It was fun to make, of course, the show, because that whole variety. Every filmmaker, George Lucas included, loves to jump from genre to genre, and I'm sure he knew that in his career he wasn't going to be able to make all these different kinds of movies, like a musical.
How was it with Gloria last night? Gloria? She's wonderful. What about your other girl? Kate? Yeah. She's wonderful too.
She's wonderful too. What am I gonna do?
A horror movie, but Young Indy was a chance to dabble in each of these genres and have the filmmaking fun of exploring it, to see how well you could tell a tale that connected Young Indy in with a new genre.
Yeah, it's a weird give and take, because like, in many ways, looking back, I wonder if the show would have been more successful on like a PBS channel, where it's like you go into it kind of expecting more education, more history, and you have the time to you could have the introduction, you could have somebody, the Masterpiece Theater format or whatever. But then on the other hand, it's like PBS at that point was not exactly known for the ratings, probably didn't have the money to, shell out or things like that. So ABC kind of probably was financially the safer, the more advantageous bet, but then the audiences there are not expecting the education, the anthology kind of format. So it's
PBS wasn't doing anything like that. It would have been. I think we talked about. I mean, just among ourselves, shouldn't this be on PBS, where we'd get a fair? It would be in the right context. But PBS didn't have a show like that, so I don't think they were going to dare do it. Plus money, I guess. I'm sure. I don't know exactly where all the money came to make the Young Indy series. I don't know how much George might have invested in it, what other deals were made, or whether it was all from ABC. I don't know.
Well, when you say that, I hope there's a possibility that he took it from a pirate ship. I mean, if we don't know them.
There was treasure they dug up and never told anybody. And there's I don't know why it ended up on ABC exactly. Yeah. It's not my department. I'm not a businessman.
Back to Attack of the Hawkmen. I was very curious to ask, because Daniel and I rewatched the episode to prepare for this, and it just strikes me how just absolutely marvelous the aerial battles are in that episode. I mean, to a degree that I'm not even sure I've seen matched today, especially in relation to World War I aerial battles. I wonder if you could talk a bit about filming that, designing those action sequences, and just bringing them to life, because they're really remarkable.
Yeah, it's quite a story, actually. We knew that Hawkmen would have a bigger challenge because it was anytime you say you're going to take your movie aloft, how do you do that? It's very expensive to fly. Right. It's very dangerous to fly. You need special equipment. It was kind of a crazy idea right from the start. But it, nonetheless, we went ahead, and the way there were different plans hatched at one time. We went into the production of the show with a plan that was, okay, we're going to film all the cockpits of people flying. We'll do that as a special effect, in a conventional sort of manner, building a full-size section of an airplane. I can tell you a little bit. Remind me to tell you a little bit about that funny story, but right. And we can get our actors that way. But what are we going to do for planes flying, and what are we going to do for planes even more difficult, landing and taking off?
Your airplane arrived this morning.
Sir, you said airplane?
Yeah, a new Sopper two-seater. We got a good pilot with her, Lieutenant Green.
I thought I was supposed to be analyzing photos, not taking them.
Heck no. That happens back at HQ. You take them.
You mean that I have to fly?
No. We fly. You snap.
And also, what are we going to do for planes? Because none of these historically correct planes really exist. There's a tiny handful of them, but no one's going to fly those for a movie. Not the dangers, and they're very hard to deal with. So we knew we were going to have to fake it somehow. And I think initially, when the episodes were written, I think they figured they could do it with stock footage. That there would be airplane movies out there that they could get footage from. But of course, that wasn't really an answer, because there wasn't any film out there in color that had the proper planes, because every aviation movie, World War I film since 1930 has never been entirely accurate, because the accurate planes are hard to get. And I really wanted to have accurate planes. I wanted to figure out, what did Richthofen really fly? What color was his plane? What model were they flying on, and during what months of what year? I thought, here's a chance to correct historical fact and have the fun of trying to make it accurate. We did a lot of research. We knew we could film the cockpit with actors in the cockpit somehow. Didn't know exactly how. Built a bunch of plastic model planes that we wanted, put them on sticks, and I flew them against the sky and all this sort of thing to come up with videomatics. Now, videomatics are temporary shots that show the action, the relationship of one plane to another, and I could simulate it with little sticks. I'd go outside and I'd just point up to the sky with sticks in front of camera and play these little planes. And I could get shots. I could begin to build up dogfight sequences before we even start filming, to get an idea, how many shots do we really need and what are the angles going to be, and cut that together and show George and show Rick, and we could say, well, how many, we're going to need this kind of a shot. How are we going to get that?
I got it! He's going down!
The plan evolved over. We went ahead and started filming the episode while the plan was still evolving, okay? Is how we're going to do it. I had done a film as a teenager that was very similar to Hawkmen. It was called Yankee Squadron. It was filmed in Super 8, and it was just in between college and high school with my friends. And we filmed using model planes on glass or against the sky on sticks. But I developed a system for filming underwater in a gigantic fish tank, where it's a little hard to describe, but I knew from playing with toys underwater as a kid that you could take a plastic airplane underwater and let go of it, and it would fly along in the water, being dampened by the water, and it would float and fly, okay? And I did it. I made a film where we did all the planes underwater. We built an elaborate tank in our front yard and shot this movie. And it won a National Student Film Award. It was one of the successes I had that led to me going to film school eventually. So I thought, well, maybe we could do it underwater like I did with my Super 8 film. Nobody wanted to do that. We've got to do it some other way. We finally found a guy named Frank Ryder Frank Ryder was a wealthy industrialist, kind of a Howard Hughes type wealthy man, lived in Alabama. He loved World War I flying, and he was a pilot, and he built replicas of World War I planes.
Wow.
And so he had Fokker triplanes and SE-5s and a Sopwith Camel. And they looked like the real planes, even though they had instrumentation, they had brakes, they had safety features so they could be flown successfully. He had a handful of these real planes, and he would put on air shows at his airstrip during the summer. And I went to visit Frank, and we filmed a couple of his air shows where we could just shoot planes in the sky going by clouds. And so we got a handful of pretty good ground to air shots of usually planes one at a time, sometimes two at a time. And went to maybe 2 different air shows that he had, and I gathered footage, just documentary style. We just hang out for 2 days and film. Shot it all in 35, by the way, because we wanted to have the ability to add clouds or add more planes in one shot if it didn't work. And we had planned to use Frank then for the actual specific scenes we needed air to air, and there was kind of an agreed upon price, which seemed affordable. Then while we were off shooting the actual principal photography of Hawkmen, Frank Ryder was killed in an airplane accident.
Oh, wow.
And, a tragic accident, had nothing to do with our film, but he was flying with his family across country and ran into trouble.
Yikes.
And so all of his planes, aside from losing Frank, the shock of all of that, his planes were now no longer available to anybody because they went into probate. He had a large estate to manage. And so Hawkmen basically had a year delay as we tried to figure out how to do the aerial scenes. At this point, we had cut together the show with all the cockpits we had. We had cut together some of Frank's footage that we did work. But we didn't have all the specifics we needed, like landings, taking off, and the right planes in the right sky.
Look, Germans! The whole squadron!
And so I had to think, what are we going to do? Did some more research, and I came across a group up in Oregon that builds radio-controlled World War I planes. And they're usually about 6 or 7 feet in wingspan. And since they actually are powered by real engines, they fly like real planes by radio control. And so we contracted with, I went up there and shot some tests. They had some airplanes aloft, and I filmed them in slow motion, 96 frames a second, which slows things down about 4 times. And they're just going by in the sky, and brought that back and showed it to George and Rick, and they said, hey, I put some sound effects to it, and this looks pretty good. They could not tell that these were not full-size planes. So we had them build 6 planes for us that were built to the colors and types of planes we needed in Hawkmen. We needed the Fokker triplane. We needed Indy's what's called a half strutter, which is the two cockpit observation plane that Indy flies in. And we built a couple Newport 17s and an Albatross D3 and an Albatross D5. And so we had this little fleet of actual planes. And over a period of a month or 2, when the weather was good, I'd go up to Oregon, and we'd take a 3 or 4 man crew, just me. I had a camera, 35 millimeter Mitchell camera assistant, producer Chris Bromley, who masterminded this whole thing, another friend to help out. And we shot these planes in the sky with a little group of hobby pilots.
Wow.
And they operated out of a farm. And so we cut the grass in the fields around the farm down to like a 1/2 inch and dug a hole in the ground. We put the camera right at ground level, and we built a little miniature airfield using the actual trees and everything in the background at infinity.
See, I was I was going to ask about that because like I'm from Oregon, and there's the scenes where they're like coming into the field and landing. And I was like, this looks very familiar to me, and I wanted to see like where was this filmed at? So that confirms the theory right there. It's amazing.
There's a couple shots of Mount Hood in the background.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, if we pan to the east, we would get Mount Hood, and
amazing.
Quite often the clouds were in that direction, and we'd get Mount Hood in the shot, and that would never work. But actually, we did it like old Republic pictures would have done it. We were outside in real sunlight, and what gave us a real added advantage it was that we generated from using smoke machines on the ground. We put up billowy white clouds of smoke that once they got in the sky were like exactly like clouds, so the airplanes could fly behind clouds, and you had real clouds in the distance. You had these clouds in the foreground. The planes could be behind them or fly through them, give a very realistic depth to the shots.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so we labored through probably 6 days of filming these swirly, almost uncontrollable radio control planes. I mean, they were controllable, but they fly like 50 miles an hour. They're going really fast. It's like trying to shoot bumblebees. And so that's why we shot in 35 millimeter and slow motion. The slow motion to slow the motions down and make it more like the planes, the World War I planes flew, hardly faster than 100 miles an hour. And also it would, in 35, we could shoot a wider shot because they're very hard to track and operate the camera with, stay in focus and not lose something. And we wanted to be able to reposition, extract parts of the frame later that gave us a better composition. So you kind of get the idea that we did this. It was a mixture of these miniature planes, which pretty much went undetectable to people, especially on television.
Yeah, it looks great. It looks, it really does. I wouldn't have, especially the landing shot you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
I just assumed, they could get a plane. They found a real plane. They could land the real plane. Like, you maybe can't fly, but they could just land the real plane.
Yeah, right.
It looks great.
And so we never really told anybody much about it, and kept it kind of a secret. But it eventually that gave us the bulk of material for that show, and the planes could have a little smoke generator on them, so they could put out a black smoke, and if you're going down in flames, and we could digitally add later a little bit of flame on the outside of the plane. You may notice that some of the crashes look a little phony because they bounce and they don't break apart very much, but we had to live with that.
Charlie got him, and the rest of the German squadron showed up.
Did she ripped off and go down? Not exactly, but he was hit.
I just always figure that's just planes from the era. Like, that's,
I had the same thought. Oh, look how light the wood is.
Well, they were flimsy. The great thing about flying the real radio controlled planes is that they handled like real planes. In other words, they would be buffeted around in the wind like real planes would. They would turn corners and bank and do only things that a plane actually airborne with lift under its wings could do. And so it gave you the dynamics of actual flying, which had we done wires or later had it been done digitally, you've seen in many digital reproductions of dogfights now done in World War II, the planes, it's very hard to make them look like they're really airborne.
Right.
They don't turn corners correctly. They don't bank right. They move too fast. They're too abrupt. It's, these planes behave very realistically. So that gave us the material we needed. It took a lot of editing, and we had a few mid-air collisions and had to paste planes back together. We managed to get through it. It snowed one day, so all the planes are landing and taking off in snow. But once they're in the sky, there was no snow. But just Mount Hood.
Mount Hood, yeah. I'm sorry to be this is a very specific question, but I'm just nerdy like this. Was this like, where was this farm at? Like, was it, I'm just trying to place my house in relation to where you were filming at.
The location was a farm just east of Portland.
Okay.
Probably 20-minute drive directly east. We stayed in Portland.
Okay, yeah.
Went across the bridge into the farm country. It was the base. There was a company owned by a father and son operating out of their rural household, which was a farm, not an active farm, but it had been a farm. They had a beautiful building there where they built kits of these models, so hobbyists around the world could buy a kit and fly it. And then they built these planes specifically to match what we needed. And so we had Richtofen really flying an Albatross, and all of that stuff you'd never get those, because none of those planes. There's never been a World War I movie with an Albatross in it until Hawkmen. Sorry. Later, Flyboys kind of did it digitally. And so on, but we were the physical models. We had no other choice.
That's amazing.
And I think it really worked well. They did some nice tricks, like when Indy they invert the plane and Indy falls out of the cockpit. We had a little Indy doll that was hooked up. Hooked up with some threads. And when the plane went inverted, the doll fell out of the cockpit and pulled on this little thread and opened his parachute. They rigged that up so it really, we were able to get a shot of him bailing out and puffing the parachute and so on. And so we were able to take some of these model shots and use them and actually integrate them with some of our ground shooting in near Prague. That we could put a plane in the sky above the aerodrome by merging the skies together in a split screen, that sort of thing. So it actually worked out well. The one model that did not work very well was the Pole Giant.
There it is.
Right.
We couldn't.
Yeah.
It couldn't. The Pole Giant was a really big model with almost a 10-foot wingspan, maybe not 8 feet, but it was not a flying model.
Pole Giant tactic. What do you think, you fucker?
Very impressive.
And so I shot that in the Czech Republic. We hung it from a crane on wires against the real sky. Moved the crane. I was on another crane with a camera, which also could bob up and down and float. And we had a third crane that had smoke machines in it in upwind, so the smoke would drift past camera and would make it look like the plane was moving through the sky, and it would also tend to hide the wires. So that shows you on a small budget. I mean, Rick McCallum really nailed it for, one day of shooting of one day we had good clouds there. You need good clouds to give depth. I guess I could go on for a long time about the special effects in it, but it took us a year. Yeah, it took us a year.
Wow.
After to put Hawkmen together with the aerial shots, because a long time we just couldn't figure out how to do it, and then we had to build models and execute and come back and cut in what we got, and then go up and shoot another batch, because the planes were, despite the fact that we had expert radio-controlled pilots, they couldn't do everything you'd want. You could not fly in formation with 2 or 3 planes. They wouldn't stay the same. They wouldn't fly the same speed, and they would just be going all over different directions at once. So we'd have to film one at a time and then mat them together in the final movie.
I mean, they look amazing. You mentioned earlier the deleted dogfight with the Zeppelin. Was that, did you have a Zeppelin model as well up there, or was that like a composite shot of elements?
What we did, we got a couple of stock shots from a movie called Darling Lily that Paramount had done, which has a Zeppelin over London dropping bombs. So it was a miniature shot done in England. There's some of it used in the opening titles of Hawkmen. But we had this some good angles on it flying at night in the sky, which we could use as stock shots. And then we got a model from ILM. They had built, remember, a model for
Rocketeer?
It must have been Rocketeer, yeah.
Yeah.
We got that model, and we hung that against a blue screen here in California and did a few extra shots of the angles we didn't have. And then, of course, the thing, when I was in Prague and I said, I want to have the Zeppelin sequence, they said, well, we don't have the money to build a Zeppelin gondola car, it's like a long bus-like structure with, pilots in it with the steering wheel and like a ship and everything. Well, I happened to notice at that time, since the Czech Republic had only been open from the Iron Curtain for a few years, the trolley cars in Prague were just like Zeppelin gondolas. They were these gray, long, windowed, probably built many years ago, maybe the 1930s. I don't know. But so we went to the maintenance facility for the trolley cars and got a trolley car all by itself and put a screen behind it and decked it out on the inside with a steering wheel and all of this, and put some soldiers and pilots in it. And that was our Zeppelin car. We just had a dolly track that ran alongside it. So as it moved, it looked like the Zeppelin car was moving along, flying. So we had close-ups of guys flying it.
There are shots in the episode that are there. Are those the shots on the car that you shot?
Some of it is, yeah. Any of the ones that are guys in the control room, it's like reddish lights on them and stuff.
Stop, diese Visier! Abwerfen! Bomben sind raus!
Searchlights. That's from the Prague trolley car. It was actually a trolley car that they had just sandblasted to get all the paint off it, so it was perfect. There wasn't any advertising on it or anything like that. And so that was just one of those typical spur-of-the-moment Hawkmen things that Rick McCallum let us do because he loved the idea. He loved an idea that was a very inexpensive solution. We can film the trolley car in its barn. We didn't have to build it. Just bring some lights in and shoot it. And it was just like there's another scene in Hawkmen, which was done on the spot. Which we needed a scene of Indy and this entourage of cars, motorcade with Fokker and the army generals driving into the Zeppelin base. And they go through what looks like a gate onto an airfield.
Yeah.
And we had scouted around Prague, and we found the entrance to the Prague waterworks was just had the right kind of gate and a kiosk and all that. So we came late one morning to shoot our cars driving into the gate of the water treatment plant or the water plant. And then while we were hanging around, we noticed, let's go in the water plant and see what it's all about, because it was in this, it looked like something out of Metropolis. It was this cement building with archways and big pools of water, and it was very vintage. I'm going to say, 100 years old. I said, this has got to be the inside of the hydrogen base. There was no such scene in the movie at this point. And everybody laughed so much about this, even the actors. I remember John Pertwee couldn't contain himself. Let's just walk through, and we'll just make up some dialogue of Fokker getting a tour of the inside of the Zeppelin base, and supposedly they are making hydrogen by just getting it out of electrolysis of water, which is chemically possible. And so we used, right on the spot, we just put some lights up and had him walk through the Prague water treatment plant as if it were the secret Zeppelin base. We were so proud of ourselves for doing something silly. But it gave production value, and Rick McCallum smiled again. We had a huge set without hardly any cost whatsoever.
Oh my God! It's such a James Bond level finale.
That's what I was going to say. It's like a Bond villain lair. Yeah. They're like, a great plan to build this giant plane, and we will get hydrogen from the water.
We were all so tired at that point that we were laughing at anything. And when John Pertwee would try to read his lines about the hydrogen plant, and he would do it with a German accent, honestly, break us all off, and I'd be off to the side holding my jaw shut, just so we didn't have to do another take. And I could see Nick Laws, our assistant director, who had tears on his face because for some reason, it was just very funny because it was a made-up scene. We had an extra few hours that we were ahead of schedule, I guess. And we just made it work, And
that's amazing.
It was a high moment of tired filmmakers.
Now this is where we break down the water to extract the hydrogen for the Zeppelin fleet. And over here, we are working on a new process to refine helium.
If we can perfect the method,
It will eliminate the explosive dangers of hydrogen.
So this is not the place for you to light up one of your big fat cigars, Herr Fokker.
Well, it's also like, I mean, the finale for that is arguably the most bombastic, pun intended, moment in the whole series, where it's just like this massive fight, massive explosion. You know, like it feels like there's some integration of stock footage in there, but like, what was that process like to make that finale?
Well, I jokingly had this theory. When we were doing sound, I said any film that ends with a lot of bright light and explosions is a guaranteed hit, no matter what. As long as you blow everything up at the end and there's a lot of, sparks flying and the screen goes white a couple times with flames, then the audience will forgive you because at least you delivered that ending. So I was dead set on having this exaggerated chain reaction of explosions of the Zeppelin base at the end. So there's a combination of different things there that we did a lot of practical explosions, in small parts. We filmed in 3 locations. One was out in a field with a mocked up front of the hangar opening. That's all it was. There was no hangar there. It was just a frame of a doorway, and the cars drive up to it. The guys go in, and the rest of it was a matte painting done at ILM, the base. Then we filmed in the Barrendorf soundstage for the interior of the base, and there we had lots of flame bars on the ground. They're it's like a pipe you can pump butane or propane through them and light it, and you can control off screen the amount of flames coming out of it. Thank you, Dave Beavis, our pyro guy. And you can also, control it in some way. Actors know where the fire is. You can have a wall of flame in front of you and some behind the actors, and blow things up. And then there was a miniature of the Zeppelin base hangar, which was maybe 12 feet long, once again out there in our airfield, miniature airfield, and that was blown up and filmed in slow motion. And then there's a little bit of stock footage from one of my favorite explosives films, Operation Crossbow. Yeah. It's a MGM film. If you go back and look at it, the end of that there's a V2 German World War II underground rocket factory blows up, okay, done in miniature. And I always loved that as a kid, the ending of that movie. So I thought, well, can we just buy some stock footage from Operation Crossbow? So we did. And if you take a look at Hawkmen and go through it, frame at a time, you'll notice that right before one of the wide shots, there's an explosion. You see a bunch of V2 rockets.
Yeah. It looks a little cave-like, too.
yeah. They were pretending those are hydrogen containers or something.
No, it's a secret Nazi base before the war. They're building all this stuff. And he destroyed it, and it took him 20 years to get all that back.
They rebuilt it and kept going. So it was a combination of all of those elements and, cut together that it was all full-size, well, except for the exterior of the building. I got blown up in that shot. I did 3 or 4 stunts, easy stunts, safe stunt. Well, not totally safe in Hawkmen. At the end of that episode, during that whole conflagration at the end where everything's blowing up and people are running, right toward the end of it, you'll see 2 German soldiers running directly toward camera, and they jump in the air as a big explosion goes off right behind them. It's in slow motion. Well, that's me and second unit producer Chris Bromley. We decided to get blown up, and so I didn't feel. I was a little nervous. By this point, I trusted Dave Beavis, our pyro guy. Because I'd been blowing things up for a couple of years, watching him blow things up and doing very safe with it. But when I start that shot, I'm actually standing over a 16-gallon garbage bag full of gasoline, okay? And it's got, a detonator in it. So
bomb. You were standing over a bomb.
I was standing on the bomb. I was back a little far. I had to run and jump over it and then keep running toward camera. And then it blows up behind me. So all I could feel was a giant wall of heat, behind me. and Chris was there off to the side. The interesting thing about that particular shot, we saved that for one of the last days in case we got hurt.
If you kill the director, I mean,
yeah, the last 2 or 3 days of shooting, we get down to that stuff. Yeah. It's funny, I forgot, because in the morning I had been getting shot as a German pilot trying to stop Indy in his escape in the cornfields. And I was squibbed up. I was going to do a shot where the bullet went through me, and I forgot. I was so busy directing all day, and I was still wearing my German uniform. When I got home that night, I took it off, and there was a squib with, a blood pack and everything still wired into the back. And, what is? Oh, that's right. I forgot to do that shot where I wanted to be the Wild Bunch, but
did you direct the whole day in a German uniform?
Yeah, in German uniform. Yeah, sure. I get shot a couple times along with Chris on the road. We take hits from Indy as he takes off in his airplane. Remember, he jumps on the wing and rides out with
right.
Obie Baker, and they fire their machine gun. A bunch of Germans get mowed down. Well, it's me and Chris. But back to that explosion of me jumping toward camera. What you don't see in that shot, if you look at the very top of the shot, you see for a few seconds you see a blue flame. What had happened was we were at a farm outside Prague, and there was power lines running across this farm, high tension wires. And the explosion was so hot underneath it that it short circuited, and a spark jumped between the wires on that high tension line, and it knocked out the power for the next town over. They lost power because of that shot, because it caused a short circuit. Those Americans, blowing things up with no regard. And so you can see the level of, we were getting a little dangerous there toward the end. The last few days, we said, the heck with it. We'll just play Germans. We'll get shot. We'll get squibbed. Well, George would never allow us to have a bullet hole through somebody with blood anyways, but I was prepared to shoot it just in case.
Maybe he would have maybe he could have made it work. Who knows?
It might have worked. I just forgot. I was so busy directing. I forgot that I wanted to have my big death scene. But no. I think we went back. It was either that night or the next night that was the last day of shooting on principal photography for Hawkmen in Prague. We did the nightclub scene with the Can Girls. And so that was filmed at a nightclub, a beautiful nightclub in the Europa Hotel in Prague, a turn of the century, early century hotel with a room that's like gold leaf with murals by Mucha, in it. And they let us use it for the dance hall. And so that last sequence shot there, which was supposed to be a party in the movie, was kind of the wrap party for the shoot, and it was just a fun thing to shoot that last evening because we had music and Can Girls, and everybody was wiped out at that point and ready to go home. So that was kind of a very pleasant memory.
In many ways, I feel like Attack of the Hawkmen is kind of Sean's best episode, best turn as Indy.
Do you think we shall see each other again?
I don't know.
I don't want to say goodbye, but I will say thank you.
I'm just going to be looking at photos all day. You're the one that's landed on his feet. Behind enemy lines, helping the resistance.
Thanks to you.
Well, take care of yourself, Freddie.
Indy. Go on.
Remy! Stay alive!
Do you have any thoughts about working with him as an actor and his own experiences on the show?
Well, Sean was, he became a friend. Sean kept to himself, generally speaking, throughout the shoot. It was his method. I didn't know that at first. It was interesting because I was, when I was first sent out to Africa on my second unit trip, one of the things I was also supposed to shoot while I was there was an interview with Sean for publicity purposes.
Sure.
And so I sat down with him when he had a morning where he wasn't shooting. I guess it was Oganga they were shooting, or I think, what's the name of that it has a different, Giver of Life.
Giver and Taker of Life.
Yeah.
That's right. I sat down with him kind of off to the side, outside somewhere near some trees on location. And I did like a 1 hour or more interview with him. I just put the camera on him, the video camera, and asked him questions about his career and how he got started.
I must have been 10, 11, 12 years old when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in the scene with a great big ball bearing chasing him down that tube. That was one of the most memorable scenes of any movie I've seen as a kid. Rick, the producer, gave me 3 copies of The Last Crusade, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Temple of Doom, and I watched each one of those, no joke, like 25 times to, learn how Harrison Ford rode a horse, how he walked, and how he turned around, and the way he spins around and his arms are spread out, the way he puts his hat on, the way he cocks his hat, the way he wears his hat around females. He's a ladies' man and a man's man together.
I got to know him a bit just from hearing in his words. He talked about himself, and this was very early in the series, so he hadn't probably become quite as self-conscious about being Indy yet, in the sense that he was not that guarded about his privacy, and because as the series went on, he seemed to protect himself, maybe for this concentration in acting. He didn't eat lunch with us or breakfast. Generally, he would be by himself in his trailer or wherever we were. He needed time alone. He would come to the set ready. He knew his lines, and he was kind of reluctant to do rehearsals. We would usually, if there was time, we would run through scenes prior to lighting them, just so the camera crew could know where people were going to be standing. And you'd bring the actors together, and you would play the scene. And as a director, I kind of wanted to have them put the acting into it, so I could kind of, get a sense where we're at and think about it. I did still have some time to think about, is this what I want? But Sean would not really turn himself on, you might say, until we actually rolled camera later. It was hard to get him to, he was saving himself up. I learned after a while that this is just his method. He had a Walkman with music on it and earphones in, and would spend most of his time between scenes on weightlifting and focusing, I think, on what he was going to be doing. You never really saw him playing around or no horseplay or anything of that sort. A little bit once with a giant slingshot. He was firing water balloons at people from far away, but that was about the only time. But he was quite focused, Whereas the British actors, we generally had character actors from Britain, obviously a highly refined group, had a different methodology. If you got them together for a rehearsal, they took it very seriously. They would go into character. They would try out different things. You could discuss it a bit. You get a chance from me as a director to evaluate and say, oh, okay, I see. No, that line's not really supposed to be funny. That's meant to be serious. Whatever, you react to it like a member of the audience, and then give advice. And I found the cast in general, once again, mostly the gang of British actors we had for character parts throughout the series, really wanted feedback. They also wanted you to be close to them, to have lunch with them, to discuss how things went on a scene, to be present, be close to them and not be looking through the camera or watching it, not be watching it on a TV monitor, which, in fact, we hardly ever had a TV monitor on Young Indy, to be off in a tent somewhere watching something. We did have that capability, sometimes used it. They wanted you to be sitting right there watching them. And I found that I learned a lot doing that. I was a minor league director with not a lot of experience, and I needed to know how to interact with to get performances and understand them. These people were quite experienced, and I could learn from them. So I would learn too. But they wanted attention, where Sean generally didn't want attention. He wanted to play his scene, and then after a take was done, if there was something I wanted to do differently, I would then speak to him privately, usually, call him off to the side and ask him about something. And do you want to do it a different way? Or I'd say, I want it done a different way. I put a smile on your face at the end of this line if you can. That's how I see it, that sort of thing. Things that you have to do as a director. He was very serious-minded about it, He was a great athlete, kept himself in great shape. He could do amazing leaps and jumps, and he wanted to do his own stunts. We had lots of interesting adventures together. I remember on the Princeton episode, there's a scene where he's on a bicycle at night being chased by somebody in a car. Or was that Mystery of the Blues? Gosh, which one is it?
No, I think because he goes into the water, right?
Eventually goes into the water. That's right.
Yeah, I think that is Princeton. I'm pretty sure.
That is Princeton, yeah. And so I was in a camera car, a car shooting out of the trunk of a car. It's a cameraman, and I'm next to the camera, and Sean's riding a bicycle. He's like 20 feet behind the vehicle, and then behind him is the bad guys, shooting at him. And so we're driving around this sort of warehouse district, Sean doing his biking, and I had a slingshot, and I was shooting zirconium pellets. They create sparks when they hit. They're a little pellet with a little bit of gravel in it and zirconium. So when they strike something, they make a shower of sparks. So we're supposed to be bullets off the ricocheting off.
Great.
Either the bike or something. And so I remember I'm shooting them, and they're coming sort of close to Sean. Then we turn around and we're doing the reverse angle where I'm behind Sean, shooting these pellets, and I hit him right in the back. There's a spark on the middle of his back, like RoboCop or something like that. He took a nice smack there, But his jacket was thick enough. But he was a good sport about it. He was very coordinated. I was impressed with all the physical stuff he had to do. He was always on call to do it well. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's a million anecdotes. I guess you just have to ask me a question. I'll try to remember. But
well, you've been so generous with your time already. We don't want to keep you here all day, but I know there is still like a few dying questions we want to ask you.
Yeah, why don't you try that? I've talked a lot. So
Daniel, I know you had one about the scandal of the 1920s. So
yes, I was like, okay, this is probably an easy yes or no question, but you mentioned earlier how George wanted to try different genres, and you guys did Scandal of 1920, which is it's a musical. I mean, it's like the Bandwagon. I mean, it's a whole old school musical.
When the mellow moon begins to beam, every night I dream a little dream. And of course,
sing a bit.
Charming is the theme, the he.
She can dance a bit too.
It's a pity she can't do both at the same time.
There is an internet rumor that the actual song, The Man I Love, the audio is not the actress that's being filmed, but is in fact Linda Ronstadt. Is there any truth to that you know?
Oh, wow.
Now we're all counting on you, and you're not gonna let us down. Now get out there and save the show.
I can't do it, I can't.
Yes, you can.
When the mellow moon begins to beam, every night I dream a little dream. And of course, Prince Charming is the theme, the he for me. He'll build a little home just meant for two, from which I'll never roam. Would you? And so I'll else above. I'm waiting for the man
Well, the answer is that I don't know. I don't know because I wasn't involved in that scene. It's possible because George was involved with Linda Ronstadt in that time period.
Yeah.
And I don't. That's a George Lucas question.
All right.
Write
that down.
There we go.
Put that on your George list.
It's a great version of the song, and I think my favorite. And done. They did something similar in Mystery of the Blues, where they take these old songs. I guess it's Joe McNeely, and they really powerhouse them up. And there's no version like that you can that you can find, and they've never been released. You can't get these recordings. And so when I read that, I'm like, well, that makes sense because it's great.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't sound like just they picked someone out of a random place, but
it's possible. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I wasn't. I didn't shoot a whole lot. I was off doing many things.
Yeah.
Got lots of backstage bits and pieces of things. Raising curtains and pulling ropes and that kind of people, light switches. And I assume a lot of those were used. I can't remember the cut of the show, but I didn't do a whole sequence in that show. I was on. I'm not sure what I was doing. I was there, but I was elsewhere. I think I know what I was doing. I was doing the car chase in the Princeton episode.
Sure.
Because, well, Joe, good old Joe Johnston, the great director, he filmed everything with Robin Lively. It's Robin, right? Yeah. Robin, gone.
Nancy.
I was up all last night. I've worked it out.
Worked what out?
Where the submarine's gonna pick up the German spies. Can you remember that goo, that crude oil on the van's mud flaps?
Yeah.
Well, you only get that at an oil refinery. And the only refineries near West Orange are in Bayonne, on the coast.
So did you tell the police?
Yes.
And?
Well, they wouldn't take me seriously.
But then there was a lot of second unit to get to. I was given the job of going out, getting the run-bys of the cars. And I had although Joe had all the shots of, Sean and Robin in the front seat of the car, all their dialogue and everything. There wasn't time, I guess, in his schedule to do all the actual driving, shots of the cars going over bridges, around corners, out in the, near misses and that sort of thing, going over a bridge that's supposedly falling apart. That fell to me. And I was out there with those cars doing stuff for several days or maybe a week. There was a lot of tricky stuff. You had to meet up with a dynamite truck and almost miss it and things like that. And then I had a whole bunch of shots with Robin to pick up of her going to school, coming up and down the steps of the school. She and Sean out walking by the beach and on their bicycles, romantic at sunset, that sort of thing. That was fun because they weren't really dialogue shots. They were all sort of montage types of things with the two of them.
And you mentioned that you kind of had moved on at a certain point. But there is this period we always have these questions about where they're combining episodes, they're reshooting. There's this Daredevils of the Desert, which is shot as an hour and then turned into a 90-minute film with new photography. Were you involved? Did you cut the first version, the second version? Were you involved in that at all?
I know I cut a lot of that episode. I remember this. Of course, we had Simon Winsor's Light Horseman footage. And so I know one of the assignments I had was to go through all the footage from his film and integrate it with, pull all the stuff that we could use and prepare it so that they could have a guide to what needed to be added, specifically for our heroes doing things. So I remember cutting a lot of that battle together. I remember cutting the scene where Catherine Zeta-Jones gets killed. She was the original, she originally is the one that is trying to throw the switch to blow up the wells. And so there was a whole scene where she got shot, And so, but then there was a change in all of that. I don't remember all the reasons for it. I remember when I killed her, you might say, the editor killed her. You cut that scene together and Sean shoots her. And she just sort of disappears from frame, falls out of frame. And I felt bad about it. There was something about killing her that felt wrong, even though she's an enemy.
Now that you have seen me, are you disappointed?
Quite the opposite.
I am pleased. But there must be more to my role than entertaining a bunch of Turks.
There is.
And I think that led to a rewrite, when that episode, I think everybody recognized that something felt wrong about that beat. It might have been that we liked Catherine Zeta-Jones so much as, as a person, you kill her, but then they restructured the fight And my job was to restructure the fight choreography for that. So the idea came up that we needed to beef up the end of the episode and have Indy and Daniel Craig playing General Schiller actually have what I call the slugfest. You know, they just beat each other up and we have an extended fight scene.
Do it now. Hurry!
And then he's the one that gets shot. So they needed to shoot that. They were standing by in Prague doing pickups, I guess. I was back in here cutting. That's right. And so they said, can you cut together and make some kind of a fight out of old footage, because you're good at that, Ben, and then we'll just follow that as choreography. So I went through a bunch of Bond films and John Wayne movies and Westerns, and I cut together a knockdown, drag 'em out slugfest, okay, with kicking, punching, throwing things. Even though it was different people and different shots, the idea, it structured a whole bunch of stunts that all had a continuity that flowed together, ending up with them throwing the switch, or, almost throwing the switch. And so I made this reel, we called it Slugfest, and I sent it to Rick in Prague, and that's what they showed Sean and the stunt people and Daniel Craig, pre-Bond Daniel Craig, to follow. And they put it together really close. I put the two cuts side by side, and they're fun to watch. You'll see Bond fighting, Red Grant and From Russia with Love, and grabbing the top of the railroad, the transom in the railroad car, and kicking him in the face. And they do exactly the same stunt in the show. And it was just a quick way to get through, get the conclusion. I remember in the footage they had with Daniel Craig, he was in these, his normal costume had these tall leather boots, like a German general would wear, but they were slippery, and he didn't have a good grip on the floor. So he put on red Keds, I remember. So I had to be very careful cutting the episode, because he would fly through frames sometimes, and you see these red things go by. Her shoes would go at the bottom of the frame, or they'd fly through somewhere else, because they really both did it. They got into it, and they started throwing each other around the room, and they did a great job. I guess it predates the next James Bond.
Well, it's great that you have Indiana Jones and James Bond have a fist fight. That's
exactly
the time.
And part of it was based on Sean Connery fighting Robert Shaw in Russia with Love. That's fantastic. It's all wheel of miraculous intersections. Yeah.
Another question, though, about that episode is for the additional photography done on it. There's a lot more sequences with Indy, Sean Patrick Flannery, and I forget her name now, but Catherine Zeta-Jones's character in the desert, and Catherine and her character has like a, what do they call it, a burqa? Is that right? The kind of the whole the full face covering, The kind of the going theory, I believe, is that was because by that point, Catherine Zeta-Jones's career had kind of skyrocketed quite a bit. So it's actually a body double. Do you know in the additional photography? So probably a couple of years later.
Yes, that's true. There was at least one double to get those shots because she wasn't available. So you had to take advantage. It's the old school filmmaking, the back of the head or the double. I worked with so many doubles on this show. It was just commonplace to find, to have to do that.
Now, Daniel and I have a bit of an argument between the two of us because, not argument. Daniel believes it's still Catherine Zeta-Jones's voice because she would have been working, or at least up at the ranch to do some, I think it was at ADR.
Well, she was shooting the Phantom.
She was shooting the Phantom. That's right.
When they were shooting the second half of the episode or the new scenes, Simon Windsor was making the Phantom with Catherine Zeta-Jones. So my thing is how hard is it to say, Simon, we're finishing your episode. Can you ask her to read a couple of lines into the microphone?
I'm certain that's what they did. Yeah, that would have been a logical thing. And her connection was through Simon Windsor. I mean, that whole her career was developing, I suppose, because Simon had seen her on Beersheba, and then that led to other opportunities for her. But those are the things you're faced with. I mean, continuity issues like that. I think that those additional desert scenes were done. I was out. There was a 3-way shoot going on. We were all in Yuma in the desert, and we were shooting. ILM was there shooting new shots for the Star Wars Special Edition,
of course,
of stormtroopers in the desert.
Hey, oh my God!
Someone was in the pod. The tracks go off in this direction.
I was there, also shooting the same stormtroopers, because I was doing a documentary for Nova in IMAX about special effects.
We were able to be trusted, I think, to go behind the scenes and have that privilege. And I'm also sure that the name of Nova has a great deal of respect and credibility in the industry. And I think the combination of those two factors allowed us to get privilege which we otherwise wouldn't have had.
So I had the stormtroopers, which were played by U.S. Marines, by the way, from the must have been from 29 Palms or something. And we ganged up and shot together. So I'd get a couple of IMAX shots with the stormtroopers, tramping over dunes and coming up coming over the top of a dune, something like that, looking around, which I needed for my IMAX film, and was used in the IMAX film. And then ILM was gathering plates for the new shots to go into the special edition of New Hope, and then I believe a crew stayed behind to do some shots for the Beersheba episode. I'm certain that's what happened.
No, I've read references to that. I have an official log that I don't think it's in, but I have read online in interviews people saying we shot in Arizona.
Yeah,
and that makes sense. That lines up exactly right.
Yeah, it was in Buttercup Valley, which is a part of those dunes where Jabba the Hutt's barge was built.
Yeah,
there's one section that's very commonly used in a lot of movies. I mean, going back to Beau Geste and, Stargate, there's just, it's the big sand dunes.
Yeah.
And so that was all going on, I think, as
wow.
Do you recall who was the director on that sequence for Young Indy?
Great question. I don't know. I wasn't doing it. Okay. I would have liked it. I could have done it, but I might have been asked about it or something. I don't remember, but I was busy shooting this IMAX film and was on a different schedule.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's such a long sequence. Like, it's such a, it's like 30 extra minutes or something. Like, it's a chunk of time. So
well, there's the bridge scene too. I'm sure it wasn't all shot in Yuma, but that makes sense for the dunes, because there are scenes where they're in the dunes in the desert, right? And that's where the dunes are. But then there's that bridge sequence where they're attacked by the Turks and she gets the gun, and that's also clearly shot somewhere else. And it's like, it's really kind of nuts. I love the episode, and as a movie, it works really well.
Yeah.
And it's just, it as a fan of behind the scenes material, it just kills me. Like there's no record. Like no one knows all these little things. It's hidden. It's a mystery.
Well, Rick might remember, because he, I don't know who did those pickup scenes. I mean, Beersheba was pieced together out of tattered cloth, over a period of time. I remember there was a scene in the original shoot at the end where, in the sequence where they're going to throw the switch to blow up the wells, that one of the Turkish soldiers says, "The wires have been cut by shelling." The wires have been. The line in the script is, "The wires have been cut by shelling." Okay. Now, in the Prague shoot, the original shoot, the actor, who is Czech, couldn't say those lines and make them comprehensible. And so my job was to shoot another guy. We'd cut in. When I was shooting, I think, part of Phantom Train of Doom, I don't remember, in a cave somewhere, we got a guy against the wall, and I shot another guy just saying the line over and over again. "The wires have been cut by shelling." And he could not get it right. I mean, I went through, okay, do it again. "The wires cut, shelling cut, now, shelling wires, no," and I barely got a line out of him. And they cut that line in, we cut that line, and that didn't work. So there was a third shoot. And then finally, we just dubbed the line with something, you know. I think it was the wires are cut.
Yeah.
So it was the word wires and shelling that no one could say that line.
Only one blew up. The wires must have been cut by the shelling.
Who wrote that one?
Frank Darabont.
Frank Darabont.
Well, maybe.
Darabont.
There's rumors that Carrie Fisher wrote on it too, but I don't know. We can't find any claims about that.
I don't know. But it was a line that haunted us for
oh my God,
for a while. But you run into those snags, you know, once in a while that you just can't. I know somewhere I have a tape I cut together all the different attempts that people did.
A blooper reel.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there is a blooper reel that I used to cut together stuff at the end of a season just for everybody to share.
Amazing.
And that's on there because my kids quote it. I showed it to my kids when that time, and they still. My son, who's now a sound editor at Skywalker, he often repeats that line to me when there's a problem. He'll say, "The wires have been cut by the shelling." You know,
that's amazing. That's amazing.
It's sort of a signal for something's gone wrong.
Well, Ben Burtt, you've been so kind with your time here. I mean, my God, we've been chatting for quite a while. So it's I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I hope we can have you back on sometime. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours about this show. But I guess like the final question that I have, and maybe Daniel will have a final question as well. You know, when looking at Attack of the Hawkmen, that was one of the final TV movies. And was there an awareness at the time, like these are our final entries in the show, and so let's make sure to hit these marks, or was there the hope that like it would carry on in kind of the made for TV format? And then part two to that question being, was there ever talk over the years leading up to kind of George's sale of the company of ever bringing the show back in some capacity?
I believe that when we finally finished those last 4 movies, that we considered that closing the book.
I'm glad you're safe. You're going somewhere.
University of Chicago.
Chicago?
To study archaeology.
What about Princeton?
The archaeology department's better at Chicago. You said I could decide. You wrote me.
That was a long time ago.
But Father,
Very well. If that's what you want.
Dad.
Close the door behind you when you leave, Junior.
George was always talking about putting them together as features. You know, all of them. I mean, the other, whatever number of episodes there were. And when he says that, he repeats himself. He eventually gets around to making, we're going to do it by hook or by crook. And he did. It just took a number of years. But I think we felt that was the end of it. Just every attempt had been made to try to find an audience or a network or, some way to justify continuation. But at that point, attention turned to the Star Wars prequels.
Sure.
And that just absorbed everybody's attention and all of that. It wasn't mentioned further on. I think George would have loved to have done further episodes. There was always talk about other characters and people Indy might meet and introduction of some of the characters that end up as adult characters in the actual Harrison Ford features and that sort of stuff. What was your other question? It's mind-blowing.
I'm sorry. I was just, I meant the part two there was just like, later on, post 2000, let's say, or whatever. Like, was there ever talk about like, George ever wanting to bring the show back? I mean, especially, we heard that there was around the time where he was trying to build like a sound stage up nearby the ranch or what have you. Like, was there ever hope of like, all right, the prequels are done, now we can get back to Young Indy or something like that?
I don't recall it ever being. I wouldn't have been maybe necessarily been around for that discussion, although I would, I think the passions that George Lucas had for it, I think I would have heard something because he tended to, mention those things. I spent all those years in the editing room on the prequels, and we had a lot of time to reminisce about, well, not a lot of time, but if he had a desire to do it, I think we would have talked. He talked a lot about doing the documentaries. That was, of course, absorbed a lot of years, and he must have funded that himself, I'm just guessing, because there was the whole crew at work, and he had the attitude, but now we're going to finally complete the young Indiana Jones mission, by doing these documentaries. So I don't think he intended to go back and we had explored that idea. I think when it came to releasing them, he wanted to see a proper release of them as, you know, all these sequence of 22 features. And there was a discussion, should we do them widescreen? You know, but it was nixed because of the impossible expense of doing it. The Edit Droid does put out an edit decision list with film code numbers on it. So in theory, if you could print up those edit decision lists nowadays, you could take that to the negative of, you know, those cans and everything, and it would give you a guide to where to start. Now, maybe some, you know, AI method could be used to reconstruct all the shows that based on that. It wouldn't have to match it or something. But I just don't think that's going to get done right now. You know, there's just it just doesn't have a justifiable market.
We're hoping to build that market right here. That's our
yeah, I know. Well, everybody who worked on it would love to see that part of it completed, but it's just that it's getting now that you know, the Disney has the rights to decide what to do with it. So yeah, they'd have to see it as something they want to do. We'd love to do it, of course.
That would be a great project. I mean, it's great hearing that it was widescreen and that the film's been essentially untouched. I mean, that's great. Let it be frozen in amber until someone can actually get to it. And I think the show deserves fans, and it deserves that kind of attention, and it should be preserved. And I think, you know, the effects are challenging, but other things have been scanned, and that type of work has been done. So we hope and we pray and we wait and we see.
Yeah, you might be able to just pick a couple episodes and do it or something. You just said, what would be worth it, you know?
Well, Attack of the Hawkmen.
Attack of the Hawkmen.
Hawkman's already got about 10 minutes of it. It's got a... But I've been teased so much about my long versions that I don't know. you have to get Rick and George to get over that, you know.
Not here. I mean, you've teased us with like a lost Indiana Jones episode. This is it's so enticing. This is what we love about this podcast, is hearing about all these you know, the lost scripts, or the, you know, apparently there's a lost finished episode out there. It's so cool. I mean, it's wonderful. But anyway, Ben Burtt, you've been so kind with your time here. Thank you so much for doing this. A fantastic episode. I think both Daniel and I have had just so many questions answered here.
Yeah.
So it's been wonderful. Hope we can have you back on sometime. Do you have any projects coming up that you want to plug, or anything you want to talk about?
I don't need to really plug anything. I've been scaled down. I'm not really working on any features presently. I've been back in my realm of the specialty IMAX kind of type of, you know, museum presentations. I've done a couple of those in the last few years. They were good COVID projects because I could kind of direct them myself, and they're done on a smaller scale. So I'm pursuing those. I sound like every other person in Hollywood now. I've got several things in development. You know? I was lucky most of my career that somebody else developed it, and I just got to be there for the execution of it. Now I've been in a position to try to push that boulder uphill, you know, and get somebody interested in something I want to make, and that takes full time and it's uncertain, of course. But at my age, it's fine. I mean, I'm thankful that I can still have the energy to do it. I wake up every day and I put two pieces of film together or some sound here in my little cave, and I'm enjoying it. And I still have my studio at the ranch, so I'm still sort of a museum now. I belong in a museum. That's right. Out there with all my old tape recorders and stuff. So,
well, that's fantastic.
So if you need any help on any of your projects, you know who to call. We're always here. So
you are carrying the flag. That's great. I'm glad you're doing this. You're the first person that's ever asked me a question about Young Indiana Jones.
That's fantastic.
We're happy to have that distinction. I mean, that's really great.
Yeah.
Let me say one thing, because I don't know that we've said it, and this should be said. We're on this podcast. I think I can speak for us both. We're just incredible admirers of your work and your contribution to the film industry and the history of cinema. And I don't want to go on and on and on about that, which I could, but I feel like that should be set on the record. You're an institution and an icon. And you don't belong in a museum. You belong in the Parthenon.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I've had a blessed opportunities, really, I have to say. You know, I wasn't completely pigeonholed doing one thing. I enjoyed being a filmmaker, student filmmaker forever. How's that?
Yeah.
Kind of the situation.
That's amazing. Amazing. So, listeners out there, if you'd like to get in touch with us, please find us at Young Indy Pod on Instagram. So until next time, for Daniel and myself, keep on adventuring.
Cool.